Good evening, it's 8 o'clock. The top headlines tonight. Now, the government approves that the second dose of the Covishield vaccine will be after 12 to 16 weeks. That's almost double the earlier time of 6 to 8 weeks. The new guidelines, the government says, is based on scientific advice and the World Health Organization. Also, COVID recovered people should vaccinate only after 6 months. And by December, says the government, 216 crore doses of 8 vaccines will be available in India. As Karnataka remains the highest cases in India, vaccinations for the 18 to 44-year-old age group stopped today. We are sorry we failed to save lives, says the Goa High Court. The Bombay High Court's Goa bench. Nearly 50 deaths in Goa's main government hospital in the last 2 days. The High Court directs the centre to release much-needed oxygen to Goa. A dramatic dip in Delhi's cases, just over 10,000 now. The Delhi positivity rate is also at around 14%. Delhi's Deputy Chief Minister says we now offer our extra oxygen to other states. The Chhattisgarh government stops its tender for a new assembly building. The assembly is stalled amid the Congress attack on the centre and comes after the assembly was stopped after the BJP President JP Nadda's letter to Sonia Gandhi saying, how can you protest the Central Vista? The Congress says, now stop the Central Vista, we stop the assembly. The tragic story of a 5-month-old pari lost to COVID, a warning of the vulnerability of children in this killer wave. And in other news, civil services exams have now been postponed to October. Amid the pandemic, the preliminary exam is postponed from June. And some good news, a 110-year-old who wins his battle with COVID. Also, our newsmaker on the show tonight will be Dr. Devi Shetty. But first, let's just look at the overall numbers. India now has 3,62,727 new cases. The cases up by 3.9%. We also continue to record our highest ever deaths, 4,120 deaths in the last 24 hours. They're down by 2%, but tracking over 4,000. Tests are also down by 6% at over 18,64,000 tests, and the positivity rate is 19.45%. Now, this is up by nearly 3%. So the positivity rate going up, and vaccinations in the last 24 hours are down. They've dropped majorly as many states have stopped giving vaccines in the 18 to 44 age group. Joining us is our special newsmaker on the show tonight, and that is Dr. Devi Shetty, the chairman of Narayan Health. And of course, Dr. Devi Shetty also just been appointed the head of a task force by the Karnataka government for a possible third wave. Dr. Shetty, thanks for joining us tonight to give us your perspective. First, sir, you've actually been appointed the chairman of this new task force for this third wave. Now, is this third wave a certainty? It's good that the government is preparing for it, but we're still battling this killer second wave at this point. What do you think are the key decisions that need to be taken now, especially in Karnataka, which has the highest states numbers in the country?
First of all, I am not an epidemiologist, and I am in no position to predict whether there is going to be a third wave. But all I know from the experts is that there is a strong possibility of a third wave. Looking at what happened in US and Europe, virus has behaved the same manner, so we are likely to get the third wave. And there is a possibility that the third wave virus will predominantly target the children, mainly because adults are either infected or immunized. So COVID virus has to find the new host, and the most vulnerable group in large number are the children. So when I talk about children, let's talk about children less than 12-year-old. We have nearly 150, 160 million of them. So there is a serious problem. If at all, I hope and pray to God it doesn't happen. But if it happens, we shouldn't run around like what we are currently doing, because we never anticipated what the volume of patients. First of all, I just want to put it in record that the current problem of numbers of patients, no country in the world can manage. Even England and US together can't manage. This is unmanageable number. Let's be very realistic. And government has done a phenomenal job in certain areas like oxygen distribution. I have gone through the entire detail. They have moved heaven and earth to ensure that oxygen reaches. So it is not that somebody is at fault. What is important is we have done a good job. Fine, it may not be the best job. Let's prepare ourselves for the next wave in a manner that everything is done properly so that we don't have any surprises. That's the whole purpose of my writing this article and trying to encourage the policymakers to go in this direction.
So, Dr. Shetty, because in fact you gave some very valuable suggestions last week as well when you talked about how you could use MBBS students. We know the government has already made some advance in that area. And you're talking about looking at young children, and of course, as the mother of a young child, that really is so worrying to hear. What are the top 3 recommendations that you would say for looking at the third wave? And then we could talk a bit about the current situation in Karnataka. What are your top 3 recommendations on what we need to do?
For the next wave, it is very, very important that we vaccinate all the young fathers and mothers. All the parents must be vaccinated within the next 3 months' time. Why they should be vaccinated? They must be vaccinated because if the parents are vaccinated, the chances of kids getting COVID is very, very less, hopefully. God forbid if they get infected. You must realize that managing children with COVID in the ICU is dramatically different than managing adults. Adults take care of themselves most of the time as long as they get the oxygen. Children cannot be left alone with the nurses and doctors. We have very few nurses in the COVID ICU, especially at night. And these kids are not sedated. Kids who had a heart operation, we sedate them. Whereas these kids cannot be sedated, they need to breathe. And when they are restless with low oxygen, they will throw the mask. Now, continuously 24 hours for a few days, nobody can manage these kids other than the parents. Now, it is very, very unfair to push a lady or a man whose father or mother of 3-4 children to a COVID ICU without vaccination.
Right.
And vaccination takes time because you take the first dose, even if you take it the second dose after 6 weeks, it takes at least 2 more weeks to get the antibody. So it is very, very important that we are aware of this problem and we should be preparing the parents to get into the ICU if required. God willing, it shouldn't happen. But if it happens, what are you going to do?
And you made that point that even paracetamol and even children's medicines need to be manufactured now in bulk, so we won't see a shortage of like we did with remdesivir and other medicines.
It is going to happen. You just need 500,000 kids to fall sick and fever. That's it. The medicine will disappear. Because you must realize that these stocks are made on the current requirement and you can't straight away in few days ramp up the production. Not only that, the oxygen mask, oxygen hood, I just want to let you know that children are not miniature version of adults. Whatever you have done with the adults, you can't do it with the children. And more than anything else, the biggest problem is going to be shortage of nurses and doctors. See, in adult COVID ICU, at night there may be 20-30 patients, and in some hospitals there are hardly 4-5 nurses managing this many patients. Because patients manage themselves. Whereas if there is a kid, there is a mother or father, they will be constantly demanding, and with 3-4 nurses with 20-25 patients, they can't. They want good attention.
Of course.
So we have to produce few million doctors and nurses right away who are not working inside the hospital.
And you've said that we should create an army actually of doctors and nurses who we can prepare for the third wave. But just to point out, Dr. Shetty, you've stressed out the need for vaccination. You've talked earlier about how the 20 to 45 year age group can be super spreaders. But the fact remains that currently we are battling a shortage of vaccines. We've seen different states are now issuing global tenders. So the virus is going to outpace what our vaccination requirements seem to be. And one very sad aspect of the second wave has been that we've seen so many young parents dying, breadwinners of families. We've seen a father and a mother die, leaving a child orphaned. What do you think have been the biggest differences? Because you've, of course, been in the hospital both in the first and second wave. What have been the biggest differences you've seen in the second wave, and what must be the biggest learning from this?
The first wave attacked primarily the elderly with comorbid condition. It spared the young breadwinners of the family. And second wave, large number of breadwinners of the family are affected. So the virus keeps changing its approach. So we should have a dynamic approach, and the next vulnerable group are children. So that's the reason why I strongly feel, along with many other experts, that we should be prepared. If it happens, we are prepared. If it doesn't happen, we should thank God it didn't happen.
Exactly. Do you feel, but Dr. Shetty, we've just seen the announcement that vaccine gaps have been increased, almost doubled in fact. From earlier it was 6 to 8 weeks, now it's become 12 to 16 weeks for Covishield. Do you think that this is scientifically valid? As a doctor, do you think these gaps are a good thing, that we give more people the first dose? What would you say on vaccination? What would be your advice be to policymakers and the government now?
I do not like to comment on areas where I have no expertise, Sonia. I'm sorry, I wouldn't be able to say anything. Yeah.
Well, you're a rare person to actually express that, Dr. Shetty, but thank you so much for sharing your areas of expertise with us. And I remember you working with so many pediatric heart patients through your career, and I think it's really wonderful that you're focusing for now the Karnataka task force on what should happen. I hope everyone is listening to what you're saying tonight. Thank you, Dr. Devi Shetty. But let's go across to Vishnu Shom now, who has more on this big decision by the government on actually doubling the gap between the Covishield vaccine. Vishnu, what are the details you have?
Well, lots of very important developments. Now, your second dose of Covishield vaccine, in case you've not had one, can now be administered between 12 and 16 weeks after your first dose. Now, this is the second time the government has increased the interval. It's presently recommended between 6 and 8 weeks. Now, the government says the move is based on real-life evidence of the efficacy of the vaccine. In fact, it's a move backed by the Serum Institute's Adar Poonawala, who's told us this is a very good move because this is based on data that the government received, on the basis of which they made a good scientific decision to increase the gap. Now, the medical journal Lancet seems to back the move. In a report earlier this year, Lancet said, supporting a longer interval immunization strategy, vaccine efficacy was significantly higher at 81.3% after 2 standard doses given at an interval of 12 weeks or longer. Now, the move clearly helps the government ensure that more citizens can get their first jab at a time when vaccines are in short supply, though it's still unclear when more people would actually get vaccinated at the numbers we need them. What the government says today is that between August and December, over 2 billion doses could be made available of 8 types of vaccine, including the Sputnik vaccine, which goes on sale next week. Now, we may have the vaccines, but actually administering them at the rate that needs to be done, that's a different story altogether. But that said, as far as Sputnik is concerned, there are concerns. Lancet has said, notwithstanding the previous issues and lack of transparency, the interim results from phase 3 trials of the Sputnik vaccine again raise serious concerns. Now, these allegations have been countered by Russian scientists who say clear and transparent regulatory standards exist for the provision of clinical trial data. All of this comes on a day in which the World Health Organization has raised perhaps the most important query of all. How well do the existing vaccines work on the variant of COVID called B1617, first discovered in India, now present in more than 40 countries? So the WHO says, and this is very new, preliminary laboratory studies awaiting peer review suggest a limited reduction in neutralization by antibodies. In other words, the vaccines are less effective than they were or are on the original strain for which they were designed in the first place.
जो 2 डोसेज ओरिजिनल हैं वो हमें पहले से ही मालूम है कि वो इफेक्टिव हैं। ये सिंगल डोज के बाद भी एफिकेसी इतनी अच्छी है कि हम उसको पोस्टपोन 3 हफ्ते तक, इट्स ओके, नो प्रॉब्लम एट ऑल। और बहुत सारे देशों में, मैंने जो कहा आपको, बाकी देशों में वो अपना जो है 4 to 6 या 6 to 8 वीक्स वाला ही शेड्यूल फॉलो कर रहे हैं।
So the government taking that decision after, well, reports of vaccine shortages in different parts of the country. And in Karnataka, which has the highest cases in the country, the good news is there's been a slight dip in the new cases both in Karnataka and Bengaluru, but the positivity rate still very high at 27.64%. And here vaccinations for 18 to 44-year-olds has completely stopped for now.
The enthusiasm for the COVID-19 vaccine from those in the age group 18 to 44 has been undeniable. And it took the authorities by surprise.
When the government announced for vaccination for 45 and above, there was no so much of rush. So we thought that on the basis of that we can go ahead with the 18 to 45 people also. But as soon as the second wave, it became so much across the country, people started rushing.
And so, despite a May 1st launch by the Chief Minister of the vaccination drive in the state for the 18 to 44 age group, they are now left disappointed.
No, actually vaccination should not be stopped for anyone. 18 to 45 years vaccination should be given because society will be safe as well as home and everything will be safe, I think.
ಕೊರೋನಾಗೆ ಏನು ಏಜ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಏನು ಇದಿಲ್ಲ, ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಮಕ್ಳಿಗೂ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, 18+ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, 14+ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಹಂಗಾಗಿ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ವ್ಯಾಕ್ಸಿನ್ ಸಿಗಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ನಾನು ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕೇಳ್ಕೊತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ.
Our intention is to vaccinate everybody above 18 at the earliest. So, see, it is not so easy. 17 crore people have been vaccinated by now within a very short time.
ಸರ್, ನಾನು ನಿಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಕೇಳುವಂಥದ್ದು, ಕೋರ್ಟ್ ನಮಗೆ ನಾಳೆ ಹೇಳ್ತದೆ ನೀವು ಇಷ್ಟು ಕೊಟ್ಟೇ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತೇಳಿ. ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಮ್ಯಾನುಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಚರ್ ಆಗಲಿಲ್ಲ, ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮಷ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ ನೆನಹಾಕೊಳ್ಳಿಕ್ಕಾಗುತ್ತಾ?
Vaccines continue to be a challenge in Karnataka. With demand far outstripping the supply, it is still a challenge for people to get their shots, whether second doses for the older group or the first dose for those in the age group 18 to 44.
And with vaccination being considered one of the best ways to reduce infections and fatalities, the fact that those who want vaccines in the worst hit state in India can't always get them is a matter of deep concern. With DM Kumar, Maya Sharma in Bengaluru for NDTV.
We failed to save lives. We say sorry. These words by the Goa bench at the Bombay High Court. The Bombay High Court Goa's bench said that in the wee hours of Thursday, 15 people have died at the Goa Medical College Hospital. What is the actual problem behind deaths between 2 a.m. to 6 a.m.? Remember, these deaths came after 26 patients had died earlier. The bench said we cannot let anyone die due to shortage of oxygen. They've also asked the government to give them a report by Friday 7 o'clock and said more oxygen must be given to the state. We bring you these visuals from inside that medical college hospital where nearly 50 patients have now died.
Odd number 147, 27 bed number. कसे आयज पळय 23 वॉर्ड नंबर 23 बेडांतलो अशें एक सकाळी बरे आसलेले पेशंट आयज सडनली 12 ऑक्सिजन तांकां कमी जाता आनी कित्या खातीर आनी कितें कोण टोटल अशे 6-7 जाण एकेच फावटी हांगासर डेथ जाले. सरकार कशा पद्दतीन ऑक्सिजन आसा म्हणून सांगता आनी सगळ्या लोकांच्या जिवाचेर खेळटा. आयज कोवीड पेशंट कितलेशेच 147 आयज कोवीड पेशंट पळयात कशे हांगासर पळयात कशे तळमळटात आनी हो सरकार सगळ्याक सांगता की सगळे सारके सुरक्षीत चल्ला म्हणून. तुमी पळयात कशी परिस्थिती आयज ह्या वॉर्डान चल्ल्या ती.
Really tragic to see those visuals from inside Goa's hospital, reminiscent of what was happening in Delhi. And you can see that the attendants are there of the patients because there's no one else. So they, of course, run the risk of being infected as well. So what's happening in Goa? But of course, there's some good news coming now from Delhi, where the cases have dropped to just over 10,000 cases in the last 24 hours, with 308 deaths in the last 24 hours. The positivity rate is also down to just over 14%. So that's good news. So now the Deputy Chief Minister says that we can actually give surplus oxygen from Delhi to other states.
पॉजिटिविटी रेट 14% आ चुका है और मरीजों की संख्या डेली जो मरीज आ रहे हैं उनकी संख्या भी आज घट के 10,400 के करीब रह गई है. जिम्मेदार सरकार होने के नाते हमने केंद्र सरकार को इन्फॉर्म कर दिया है कि दिल्ली की ऑक्सीजन की नीड अब कैलकुलेट होके 582 मीट्रिक टन पे आ गई है. तो जो ऑक्सीजन की जरूरत अन्य राज्यों को है उनको भी इसमें से बाकी ऑक्सीजन दी जा सकती है।
But what is the reality behind these statistics? Even 300 deaths in Delhi, each one is a valuable human life, leaving behind loved ones. In this particularly tragic story, which I must warn you is going to be very disturbing for viewers, the story of a 5-month-old girl, a 5-month-old baby named Pari, who died of COVID and was cremated at the crematorium ground by her father and grieving relatives. Even the people who had gathered there, the people who carry out this work, say they broke down when they saw a 5-month-old baby girl who died because of COVID.
छोटी सी 5 महीने की बच्ची जो परी ही थी और नाम भी परी था, इस शमशान घाट में लाई गई है आज संस्कार के लिए। इससे ज़्यादा दुख की बात नहीं हो सकती है।
Prahlad has bid his last goodbye to his baby girl, Pari, just 150 days into this world. Pari was just 5 months old and COVID positive. She spent the last 6 days on the ventilator battling for her life. The family did everything in their capacity to save her, including her uncle who donated his blood.
उसे ब्लड की कमी थी तो ब्लड मैंने खुद अपना ब्लड उसे चढ़वाया था और ए प्लस क्या कहते हैं उसको ब्लड दे करके आया था मैं 100 ml ब्लड चढ़ा था उसका।
Social worker Jitendra Singh Shanti, who has been helping families perform last rites, cremated her. He said he hadn't seen anything like this before.
इस बच्ची ने कल हमारे शमशान घाट में सबको रुला दिया। मुझे लगता है ये बच्चों में वायरस का आना बहुत खतरनाक है और कोई इलाज ना मिल पाना उससे ज़्यादा खतरनाक है। मैंने कल उनको जब शक्ल दिखाई दी वाकई परी थी उनकी।
Pari's father says the virus was so severe it damaged her lungs. The family is inconsolable. Their 3-year-old son keeps asking for a video call with his sister. The virus is truly more dangerous to young India now. Many experts, doctors have said this repeatedly. What could be more painful than the news of a father cremating his 5 months newborn baby girl? With camera person Sushil Rathi in Delhi, Shanakshi Chakravarti for NDTV.
And that's what we have to remember. These are not statistics. This is heartbreaking pain for all the families. We must bring those death rates down. And now what we're seeing is that air ambulances have now been playing a big role in transporting critically ill COVID patients from states like Jharkhand. The latest in this incident, Uma is reporting, a patient has been flown from Ranchi to medical hubs like Hyderabad and Chennai. These air ambulances are expensive. They can range from 6 to 20 lakhs. But Hyderabad, Chennai, Bengaluru have sophisticated ECMO centers and lung transplant expertise for patients who are running out of all hope.
This 39-year-old patient in fact has been brought in from Ranchi to Hyderabad in an air ambulance. This is a team in fact who travelled with him. It is very challenging. In fact, वहाँ से लेके आना काफी चैलेंजिंग रहता है।
जी मैडम, बहुत चैलेंजिंग रहता है क्योंकि हाई एल्टीट्यूड पे ऑक्सीजन का प्रेशर भी रहता है, ऊपर से पेशेंट का कंडीशन भी क्रिटिकल है, तो बहुत सारी चीज़ें रहती है जो हमको थोड़ा मैनेज करना रहता है। लेकिन हमारे पास जो एयर रेस्क्यू की जो टीम है वो सब पूरी तरीके से मैनेज करती है। हमारे पास सारे इंस्ट्रूमेंट है, वेंटिलेटर, सब कुछ, इको मशीन, सब पूरी तरीके सारे मेडिसिन भी है, तो हम अच्छे से मैनेज कर लेते हैं।
और आप पिछले कुछ दिनों में काफी ये प्रेशर रहा होगा ऐसे एयर ट्रैवल से पेशेंट्स को लेकर?
जी, बहुत सारे पेशेंट रहते हैं क्योंकि अभी इस टाइम पे जो पेंडेमिक चल रहा है इसकी वजह से बहुत सारे कॉल्स रहते हैं हमको दिन रात, तो हम यही कर रहे हैं अभी फिलहाल तो।
और आप स्पेशलाइज है एयर ट्रांसफर में?
जी मैडम जी, हम लोग को इसी के लिए ट्रेनिंग मिली है हम लोग को।
Well, a quick look at some other news. Chhattisgarh has stopped all major construction projects, including the new plan for an assembly building. This came after the BJP president's taunt to Congress President Sonia Gandhi, saying, why are you protesting the central vista when Chhattisgarh is building a new assembly? So the Chhattisgarh Chief Minister has responded by scrapping all tenders. Now the Congress says the ball is in the centre's court. Will it actually scrap the central vista too? Well, many parts of the country are celebrating Eid today and Eid Mubarak and tomorrow as well. However, the fact remains that clerics have called for Eid to be celebrated at home. But here again are worrying visuals from Telangana, which is under a 10-day lockdown. But we can see huge crowds of people here in the old city who are actually going to buy essentials for tomorrow's festival. But the point being that these really turn out to be super spreader events, and as clerics are pointing out that like the Kumbh Mela and this, you can't let religion and faith come before saving lives. Well, in other news, the UPSC has postponed the civil services preliminary exam, which is scheduled to be held at the end of June. Now it will be held in October. That's of course because of the current pandemic going on. So the exams now to be held in October, not June. Moving on to other news, and let's always end with some good news. This is of a 110-year-old man who's recovered from COVID.
మీ పేరేంటండి? ఓకే, ఏ ఊరండి మీది? మీ సొంత ఊరేది?
Well, he was in the hospital since April 23rd, but he's come out now and is fully recovered. We'll take a quick break.